The plane soared above the clouds and tension filled the cabin. It wasn't caused by turbulence, but by words sharper than any storm. A young woman, kind-hearted and calm, had taken her seat near a group of passengers. Their disdainful glances and whispered remarks made it clear she didn't belong in their eyes. Their laughter stung, and their comments cut deep. But she stayed silent, her composure masking the hurt within. She wasn't looking for a fight. She was just trying to get through the flight. But then, the unthinkable happened. The air thickened and chaos erupted. Those same passengers found themselves in desperate need of help. In that critical moment, all eyes turned to her, the very person they had dismissed. What she did next left everyone speechless and redefined what it means to rise above hate. You won't believe how this flight ended. Stay tuned for the full story. The flight had started out like any other. Passengers boarded, found their seats, and settled in for the journey ahead. Among them was Elena, a nurse traveling home after a long, exhausting week. She kept to herself, quietly flipping through a book as the plane taxied down the runway. But even as she tried to disappear into the pages, the murmurs around her were impossible to ignore. A group seated a few rows behind her exchanged cruel jokes under their breath. Their laughter was loud enough to draw uneasy glances from other passengers. Elena didn't react. She had dealt with this kind of treatment before, subtle, stinging, and deeply unfair. Still, their words weighed heavy on her heart. Why can't they just leave me alone, she thought to herself, focusing on breathing, reminding herself that the flight was only a few hours long. But as the plane climbed higher into the sky, something far more serious began to unfold. The flight seemed to settle into a routine, but Elena couldn't shake the unease from the earlier comments. She tried to distract herself by looking out the window, watching the endless expanse of clouds. Across the aisle, a mother soothed a restless baby while a flight attendant handed out drinks. Everything appeared calm on the surface. But just as Elena began to relax, a commotion erupted a few rows ahead. One of the passengers, an older man from the same group that had mocked her earlier, was gasping for air, clutching his chest. Panic spread like wildfire. His companions froze, their faces pale, unsure of what to do. A flight attendant rushed over, calling out for medical help. Elena hesitated for a moment, her heartbeat quickening. This was her chance to look the other way, to let someone else step up. But as the man's breathing grew more labored, she made her decision. Elena quickly unbuckled her seatbelt, her hands steady despite the chaos around her. "I'm a nurse," Elena said firmly, stepping into the aisle. The flight attendant looked relieved and guided her toward the struggling passenger. The man's friends, the ones who had mocked her earlier, now stared at her with desperation and fear. But just as relief began to build, the plane shuddered violently. A wave of turbulence swept through, throwing passenger belongings into the aisle. Elena braced herself, shielding the man with her body as his condition worsened. His breathing was faint now, his face pale. Elena knew the clock was ticking. Kneeling beside him, Elena asked rapid questions, checking his pulse and observing his shallow breaths. It was clear he was having a medical emergency, possibly a heart attack. The plane wasn't equipped for something this serious, but Elena knew that every second mattered. She called for the emergency kit and instructed the flight attendant to alert the pilot. As she worked, she could feel the weight of the group's eyes on her. Their silence was deafening, a stark contrast to their earlier mocking laughter. As Elena worked to stabilize the man, she heard a sudden announcement from the cockpit. The captain's urgent voice cut through the cabin. "We've declared a medical emergency and are preparing for an unscheduled landing." Waves of panic rippled through the passengers, the reality of the situation sinking in. Then another layer of tension emerged. The emergency medical kit was missing crucial supplies. "We don't have a defibrillator," the flight attendant whispered, panic creeping into her voice. Elena's heart sank. Without it, the man's survival depended solely on her skill and luck. The cabin felt like it was holding its breath as Elena moved with precision, using what little she had to keep the man alive. She improvised, performing chest compressions while urging the flight attendant to keep an oxygen mask in place. Passengers whispered nervously, some offering prayers, others watching in stunned silence. The turbulence eased, but the tension remained thick in the air. Just as the plane began its descent for the emergency landing, the man's condition took a sudden turn. His pulse faltered, and Elena knew she had seconds to act. Ignoring the weight of the moment, she doubled down, her hands steady but her mind racing. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the man took a weak, shuddering breath. A murmur of relief spread through the cabin as the plane touched down. But the twist wasn't over yet. Paramedics rushed to the scene, pushing the man off the plane. One of his companions, who had sneered at Elena earlier, approached her with tears in his eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," he stammered, his voice trembling. "You saved his life. We were wrong about you." Elena simply nodded, exhaustion written all over her face as she gathered her things, ready to leave. She turned back for a moment, her voice quiet but firm. "Sometimes," she said, "kindness is the best response to hate." With that, she walked away, leaving the group in the stunned silence, forever changed by her courage and grace. As Elena stepped off the plane, the cool air of the runway hit her face, a stark contrast to the heavy atmosphere she had just left behind. She felt a wave of exhaustion, but also a quiet sense of pride. She hadn't just saved a life, she had shown what it meant to rise above hate. Inside the terminal, a few passengers from the flight caught up to her, thanking her for what she had done. Some even apologized for not speaking up earlier. Elena accepted their words with a small smile, though she didn't linger. She had no interest in reliving the pain of the past few hours. As she walked away, Elena reflected on the unexpected journey. Hate could be loud, cruel, and unjust, but she had proven that compassion was stronger in the end. She hadn't just helped save a life. She had reminded everyone, including herself, of the power of grace.